Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Wiley, and I'm the CEO of Glaucoma Australia. Welcome to another Q&A session this evening. We have a very, very special guest and also a very interesting subject this evening, something that's quite different than what Glaucoma Australia might normally talk about in our live Q&A. So let me not delay any longer and firstly introduce you to Shannon Davis. Shannon Davis is a patient, but I would also say an ambassador for Glaucoma Australia. I met him very early on when I started at Glaucoma Australia, and he blew my mind, to be honest, with his personal story, and actually taught me so much about, I guess, the journey that a patient goes on from first diagnosis through to thinking about how they're going to live with glaucoma for the rest of their lives. So thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon.
Pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Before we kick off and I get you telling your story, I just also want to thank our sponsor for these live Q&A sessions in 2023, and that is Glaucus. They've very, very generously supported these sessions. They're so valuable to our community, and we just want to thank you so much for that belief in us. So without any further ado, Shannon, before I start that, as I said before, this is quite a different session than what we might normally broadcast for Glaucoma Australia, and we're going to be talking about subjects of a sort of a non-clinical variety. So I just want to remind everyone, particularly when you're sending questions in, we really can't give legal advice or financial advice, particularly not on your individual situations. But we're very much hoping that Shannon's journey might enlighten you to some of the support that might be out there as you progress with your glaucoma. So, all right, I'm going to turn over to you now, Shannon. So tell us all about yourself and when you first realised that you had glaucoma.
Sure. Thank you, Richard, and hi everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this evening, and just would like to congratulate Glaucoma Australia on all of the activities this week. I think it's been a wonderful campaign to raise awareness in the community. So really appreciating that as a sufferer of glaucoma. So my background, I guess the most important thing to share with you about me is I'm very family orientated. And in the photo there on the screen, you can see my beautiful wife and two young sons. They're everything to me. And I guess you can take from that photo, the things that are most important to me in life. My background in terms of my glaucoma journey is I'm currently 46, turning 47 this year, and I was diagnosed in 2020, so a few years ago now. It was an extreme shock when it happened. I inadvertently, on a routine check of my eyes at an optometrist, discovered that I had advanced glaucoma, and significant damage had occurred to both of my optical nerves. So both eyes were affected. And up until that point, I had no prior symptoms or any knowledge at all that something was happening in the background. So that was a complete and utter shock. I actually went into the optometrist because at the age that I was, I assumed I might be getting close to needing prescription glasses. And I literally did it on the way to the grocery store. And within minutes, I was told that I was going to be needing to see an eye surgeon urgently the next morning. And my life was completely turned upside down from that point. From that point, I was basically went on the treatment journey. So I was more formally clinically assessed by my treating eye surgeon. And I went on the treatment journey and pretty much tried every single means to address the high pressure that I had. When I was diagnosed, I'd been walking around with pressures in the high 40s, unbeknownst to me. Wow. And as many of the listeners would know, I think the average range for someone that doesn't have glaucoma is kind of 13 to 21. And here I was walking around in the high 40s. And so I went on that treatment journey to reduce that pressure in both eyes, starting with various combinations of eye drops. We then progressed to a couple of rounds of laser surgery in both eyes. And we were having some success, but not enough success to really satisfy ourselves that we were getting down to the target range. particularly because my glaucoma was so advanced and there had been so much damage done that I really had nothing left to play with in terms of my remaining vision. So we really needed to get it down as low as possible. We moved from laser surgery and drops into the decision to have trabeculectomy surgery done on both eyes. I must admit that was one of the most scary parts of the journey, and even deciding which eye to do first was an incredibly difficult stage to go through. My right eye is a little bit better than my left eye, but still very advanced, glaucoma in the right eye. My left eye is kind of end stage glaucoma, so a lot worse, and certainly there's a lot more work being done by the right eye in my case. So even having a decision to make around which eye to get operated on first, and then you go through the surgery, the recovery process of a few months, and then having to go through it all again. So it's kind of like a 6 to 8 month journey to go through those surgeries. And I guess my relationship with Glaucoma Australia really started to intensify during that period, because I was already, I'd been reached out to by Glaucoma Australia once I was diagnosed. I was referred to them by my ophthalmologist, and the conversations initially were just finding out as much as I could about the disease and asking a lot of questions about the different eye drops and the laser surgeries and different treatments. Where things became extremely valuable to me was when we got to that trabeculectomy stage, and I was having to make those decisions and calls on, which eye and what now and what next and how to get through that big process. And the conversations were hugely valuable to me and my family in navigating what was pretty much the scariest phase of the journey. And so I guess got through that, and I'm pleased to report that as at today, we have been able to stabilise the pressures. I was just mentioning to Richard off air that I'm actually seeing my ophthalmologist on Monday, and it's been 6 months since I had my last check-in, so touch wood that the pressures are still stable, and we can move forward to on another 6 monthly checkup basis, but you never know. Things can escalate in the background, so I'm hoping that everything's still stable, and certainly for the last 12 months, things have been where we wanted them to be from that perspective.
Right. Perfect. No, listen, that's thank you so much. It's quite an amazing story, and I guess again goes back to this concept of the silent thief of sight, doesn't it? I mean, for you to really not notice that there's anything different about your eyesight, and thinking that, oh, well, maybe I should just go and get my eyes tested for reading glasses, speaks very much to the nature of glaucoma, isn't it?
Yeah, I thinking back, because I tried to think, well, was there any time that things happened that I might have been aware of, that something was affecting my peripheral vision so badly? And we can think of moments where I might have knocked my head on a cupboard door or walked into something or tripped, and I always thought I was just being clumsy in those moments, like you do. If I wasn't wearing prescription glasses, my theory on my eyes was that my eyes must be healthy. If I've got vision such that I don't need prescription glasses. So that was the biggest mistake in terms of my knowledge gap, because clearly that's not the case, as I've since learnt. And it really has had a massive impact on my life. I mean, I was very shortly after diagnosis, I was in a situation where I had to medically surrender my driver's license, and I medically retired from my work as a partner of a leading professional services firm.
That was the bit that I really wanted to pick up on. So obviously you've talked a little bit about, where your life was at. We talked about the diagnosis and the treatment pathways you then went on. So let's talk about that. So obviously it sounds like you really just needed to stop life as you knew it at that point. So you made the decision that you were going to stop working and surrender your license. Then maybe talk to us a little bit about the thought processes around, what does this mean for me financially and for my family, and how am I going to sustain my beautiful young family, going forward?
Yeah, so I guess I'll deal with the license first because that's quite clean to deal with. The license for me was, I was failing the driving test, so the visual field test that would be done for someone with glaucoma to be able to retain the driver's license. I was failing that, but I was failing it in a way that, such that, it wasn't a slam dunk. I was kind of close to the threshold, but I was below the required threshold. So there was a discussion around, well, should I apply for a restricted license and try and fight to retain my license in some way? Because I was, reasonably close to that threshold. And where I got to on it was, when I considered the risk to people in the community from me being behind the wheel and something going wrong. And I really tried to understand, well, what would be the impact of me retaining that license? And the reality is, without that peripheral vision, I would not be able to respond in time. My reflexes would not be as fast if something unintended were to occur around the vehicle. So if someone was to run onto the road from out of my peripheral vision, or a pet, or anyone, a kid, or any member of the community, I wouldn't be able to react as fast as I needed to ensure their safety, let alone the safety of my family. And so I really, very early on, made the decision to de-risk all of that. And, luckily enough for me, I live in, close to the city with lots of access to public transport and Ubers. And so for me, the decision was very straightforward on that front. In relation to the decision around work, that was a very difficult process to work through, especially because of the financial consideration. And I guess that's part of what we're talking about tonight. I was eligible for some insurances and became aware early on in the process of being diagnosed of where I stood in relation to those benefits. And so luckily for me, the stress, if you like, around the financial aspects to the decision were kind of taken off the table, because I was in a situation, because of my insurances, of where I was able to make a decision based on, well, where do I see myself spending my time with my remaining vision? And my prognosis, given that I've got end-stage glaucoma, isn't great. And being so young, it isn't great. And there is a, very probabilistic outcome that could happen in the short to medium term around losing the remaining vision. And so for me, again, as I said at the outset, I'm all about family. And I was really clear that to me that having had a very successful professional services career, which lasted over 20 years, for me, the decision was very straightforward to really align my time to creating very special memories with my family, with my wife and children now, whilst we can, and whilst I have vision sufficient to be able to really create those special memories and do the activities I want to do with them. And that's where we landed on that decision. We basically had a call to make on, medical retirement, or try and push forward and continue to work in professional services, even though the prospect of going fully blind was real.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that background. So we'll come sort of to the part of the story when you told me this is the first time that I found absolutely fascinating, and you taught me some things about insurances and superannuation and some of the basic coverage that we all have just as part of our superannuations that I wasn't aware of. So why don't we go into that? I think we've got a slide coming up for the three main areas where you can actually seek financial support. So we'll get you to walk us through us from here.
Yeah. So there's, I guess, three areas to think about this. So one is the insurance cover that people may have. So in my case, I had, because I was a part of the firm that I was with, I had certain insurances. So I had TPD insurance, which was attached to a life insurance policy. I had trauma insurance, which is all about getting a benefit paid on diagnosis of certain conditions. I think there's 40 to 50 conditions that are listed in those types of policies. And then I also had income protection insurance. And I guess that, as I mentioned to you when we spoke about this, Richard, one of the key takeaways for me here is that prior to all of this happening, I didn't really have an appreciation of the structure of that insurance, particularly the life and TPD policy. I knew that I had life insurance, but I really didn't realize that I had this TPD policy that was attached to it and built into it. And I guess the key takeaway, I guess, for our listeners tonight would be that, you know, if you have a superannuation balance, which we all do, there's actually a requirement under superannuation law that people have at least one unit of life insurance in their superannuation fund. So if you're with one of the major superannuation providers, which most of us are, employer funds and so forth, typically you'll find that you'll have some level of life cover within that fund, and attached to that life cover will be a TPD policy, total and permanent disablement. Now, within that total and permanent disablement policy, there will be guidelines and definitions around loss of vision. There won't be a specific reference to glaucoma, it'll be loss of vision. And if those definitions, if you were to meet them because of vision loss due to glaucoma, which in my case was the position, then you would be eligible for those benefits. And so I think the big takeaway for me, the big learn for me was, you know, I wasn't aware that that benefit even really was there when I was first diagnosed. And it was actually through working through the PDS. I got a copy of the PDS in relation to the insurance policy, and all of my insurance policies actually had a read of the sections that related to vision loss and started to have conversations with my treating doctors about where I stood in relation to each of those definitions. And it was very clear to me early on that I was well and truly over those thresholds to be able to move forward and make claims on those policies.
That's fascinating. I mean, the first time I heard that, I had no idea about that. I'm sure there are many of our viewers out there right now who probably don't realise that, even though they probably think they might not be insured, or they haven't gone and they're paying annually or monthly or whatever into those sorts of policies. Go and investigate your superannuation, as Shannon did, because you might well find that there's actually some coverage in there that you didn't know you were able to receive. So I think that's a really key outtake from our chat tonight. So, but why don't we talk about the first sort of call you made to the insurance company and what that experience was like and the sort of feedback that you got?
Yeah. Well, I won't name the insurer, but
No. Don't do that.
The initial conversation that I had with them around this diagnosis was, okay, so you've lost your peripheral vision, so you are legally blind, but you still don't require prescription glasses. How could you possibly be eligible for these benefits when you have some central vision left, and you don't require prescription glasses? So how about you, and I'm summarizing this, but the tone of the conversation was along the lines of, how about you call us back when you're fully blind? And really what that represented from my perspective was a lack of knowledge on the other end of the phone about what glaucoma was. And so very early on in the process, I realized that I had to get the help of a solicitor to help me work through the process of claiming on these policies, because typically we were dealing with people on the other side that were assessing the claims who had zero knowledge of glaucoma. And if there's one thing I've learned about vision loss, is there's lots of different types and forms of vision loss. There's many different definitions of vision loss, and glaucoma is a particular way of losing your vision, starting at the peripheral and working its way in, that has a particular impact on your life and your ability to function and your ability to perform your employment duties, for example, that needs to be considered in that context. And so I sought out the assistance of a solicitor who actually specialized in insurance claims early on to help me piece that together for the insurers. And once I was able to do that, it actually became a very straightforward process to work through. But I would say another learning on this was be ready for the fact that you may be dealing with, some people, naturally enough, someone who's got a financial background won't and may not have even, like myself, didn't even really know what glaucoma was prior to being diagnosed. So I think you've just got to factor that in before you get really down the track, because obviously in relation to insurance claims, you want to be a little bit careful around, lodging a claim and not giving them everything they need in order to consider it.
Absolutely. Fantastic. No, that's absolutely right. And it sounds like as well that your ophthalmologist was really helpful here as well when it came to actually pulling together the information that was required by the insurance company to be able to essentially tick the boxes to know that you qualified for this support.
Yeah, I mean, there's a clinical assessment that the insurer will do, an independent clinical assessment that will be done by someone other than your treating ophthalmologist. But the process starts from your ophthalmologist making the decision or making the call that you're over the required threshold. So if your insurance policy, for example, I think one of my policies, the definition of vision loss, sufficient vision loss, was you had to be within 20 degrees of arc in both eyes. And so someone who's within 10 degrees of arc, for example, would be well and truly over that threshold. And so it's really your treating ophthalmologist that will be able to tell you where you stand. And then the insurer will always have someone independently verify that through their own clinical assessment processes. But it is definitely a conversation to be having with your ophthalmologist, with the PDS in front of you, so you can both together look at the definitions. And the definitions, as I've learned, are typically pretty standard across the different insurers. You shouldn't see too much variance. So the one that I quoted, the 20 degrees, is actually pretty common across the insurance industry in Australia. So you'll find that your ophthalmologist will have a clear view on where you stand in relation to those thresholds.
And it sounds like once you'd actually compiled that information, the process then became much more easy, and you got a relatively fast positive outcome.
It took time. Even
probably oversimplifying. So
it took time, but I did find that the tone of the conversations changed, the understanding from the insurer's perspective on exactly the impact that was being had across the different requirements. So in relation to trauma, it's quite straightforward because you've either been diagnosed or not been diagnosed, and it's payable on diagnosis. So that's kind of straightforward. And then total and permanent disablement is a more complex clinical assessment that needs to be done. You are getting assessed by occupational therapists and occupational physicians, as well as your ophthalmologist. And so all of that information does take time to collate, get together, and then submit that through an assessment process. So that's probably one that takes a little bit longer. And then the income protection insurance kind of runs off the back of that. At the end of the day, if you're totally and permanently disabled and you're not returning to work, then your income protection kind of as a default would kick in after that. So that's kind of how the three policies interact. And it does take time, but the tone of the conversations and the willingness of the insurer to really appreciate the impact of glaucoma on someone's life, I found did change once we were able to give them what they needed.
And so we've got some information on the screen right now. I should also say, because what we're talking about here has many layers to it, we're actually going to provide some information, some detailed information on our website. And I also believe that people that have attended and requested a link to attend tonight are going to be sent some information and some links in the coming days as well. So don't feel like you need to busily write all this down. There is going to be some more information available for you. So in terms of the first step, it sounds like the first step is to access your superannuation if you've got an online account, see whether you can download the product disclosure statement or the PDS, and even there might be an opportunity to go to MyGov and find some more information as well. Is that what you would recommend?
Absolutely. And look, I must admit, from memory, I had to call my super fund. I couldn't find it on the website, the PDS. Mm-hmm. I was sort of getting referred into an insurance company website where I then couldn't find the PDS. So I just rang my super fund and said, look, I'm in a situation where I may be, eligible to make a claim on the insurance that's within my super. can you please send me the PDS or PDSs that cover those different policies? And they emailed them through. And that really was the beginning. That opened up an opportunity for myself and my ophthalmologist to start to assess what I might be eligible for.
Excellent. Oh, that's great advice. Thank you very much. All right. Well, I think we've talked a little bit about insurance and disability cover now. Hopefully it's all right for me to disclose, but once you got a positive result from that point of view, I presume your outlook felt a lot more assured, and there was a lot more confidence in what the future looked like for you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I was really excited to have this conversation tonight to try and help others is I actually feel that one of the contributing factors to me stabilizing my eye pressure and stabilizing the progression of the disease over the last year has been the fact that I don't have that financial stress. If I was dealing with the financial stress on top of the glaucoma issue, I think that has the potential to compound and really inhibit your ability to halt the progression of the disease. I really feel with that taken care of, that issue kind of goes away, and you can really focus on what am I going to do from a health perspective to take this head on, which I've done. And I do feel like it's been one of the biggest reasons I've been able to do that successfully so far is I was able to kind of take that financial stress away.
Fantastic. All right, excellent. Why don't we go back to that slide where we've got the three different sort of streams of support that Shannon has been able to access. So let's get on to maybe circle number 2, which is talking about things like blind pensions.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. So there was a process, there was a stage where I was consulting an eye surgeon for a second opinion. It was around the time where I was going through the trabeculectomies, and it was with the full knowledge of my ophthalmologist. He actually recommended that I go and speak to a few others just so I could start to build confidence that this was the right step to take. So he was completely aware of my desire to go and have those conversations and supported me in that process. And this particular specialist was in Macquarie Street. I remember the day, and we went through the process, and basically he validated the strategy of moving forward with the trabeculectomy. But the one thing he did say to me as I was leaving his office, he sort of grabbed me by the arm and he said, "Shannon, when you get home tonight, I recommend you look into applying for the blind pension." And at that stage, I hadn't medically retired. I was on sick leave. I hadn't made the decision to medically retire. That process hadn't been finalised. And my initial reaction was, well, I won't qualify for that because my income level as a partner of a professional services firm would mean that I wouldn't be eligible, I imagine, for that type of government benefit. And he said, "Oh, no, the benefits, most, if not all of the benefits from the government in relation to vision loss, the legally blind, or anything to do with that area of benefit is not means tested." And in fact, it's not means tested around the world, Shannon, because the philosophy is that governments want people who have lost their vision or are losing their vision to participate as much as possible in the community, including work if they want to and can and are able to. And so they don't want to be in a situation where it's either or. They want you to allow you to do everything. And if that means you want to work, and you can work and get this pension. So that was a real light bulb moment for me. I had no clue that was even on offer for someone that would have a relatively high income level. And so I began to look into that side of things, and very easily came across the process of applying for it and realized that the definitions were actually very similar to the definitions that were in the insurance policies that we've just spoken about. And so the process of then getting my ophthalmologist to fill out the required form and me providing the necessary information, and then me going through the independent clinical assessment process to verify that I was legally blind, left me in a position where that actually ended up being something that I became eligible for. And I must admit, that is a significant financial benefit because it's tax exempt income and it's paid, every month. But it also has other benefits. And the most notable one, which I've mentioned to you, Richard, is access. It provides you with access to the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. And for people that are not across what that is, that's essentially a significant discount on your medication, including your glaucoma medication. So I was paying in the hundreds of dollars at the time that I applied for the blind pension. I was paying in the hundreds of dollars almost weekly for my various eye drop medications. And the week after I was, when I was successfully approved to be a participant in the disability support pension process, the next time I ordered my eye drops, they cost $6.
Wow.
So it was just a huge change in terms of the cost of my medication. And it's a benefit that I would not have even been aware of. And look, the other message that particular eye surgeon gave me that afternoon was, there are other government benefits, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and they're all not means tested. And his philosophy on it was, Shannon, whether you think you need all of these things now or not is not the question. The point is, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to look into these things and apply for them if and when you do lose your remaining vision. You've got the ability now, because you've got your remaining vision, your central vision in particular, you've got an ability now to actually go through the process, look into it, speak to the people you need to speak to, get around to different places, fill out forms to be able to successfully get yourself plugged into these different benefits. And you should do that now to kind of prepare yourself for what might be worse times ahead, where it will be a lot trickier for you to get these things set up. And it was one of the best pieces of advice I was given through the whole process.
No, it's fantastic advice. I mean, a lot of people out there would be thinking that it's hard enough to navigate complicated government websites when you're applying for support benefits and things like that, with perfect eyesight, let alone when your eyesight's deteriorating and you're coming to grips with what that all means.
Exactly right. And we'll I'm sure we'll get onto it, but some of the other benefits aren't financial. They're just access to support and services that actually equip you with the ability to deal with that progressive vision loss. And again, he was saying to me, you don't need to know how to know how to read Braille now, but what if you were to teach yourself now on how to read Braille? Because down the track, it might be an essential or critical skill that will really help you to navigate things. And that was one example of the type of, support journey to go on now, as opposed to leaving it to when things are bleak. And so, it was a really helpful nudge from someone who obviously had a lot of experience with these things. And the disability support pension has been, a really good benefit to be a part of. And it does, there are other benefits that come into play with it, similar to any other pension the government has. So, for example, you receive rebates on things like your energy bills and your council rates. And so you do access other discounts as a result of being a part of the disability support pension. And your family members access some of those benefits as well. So in my case, whilst ever I'm on the disability support pension, my family members are accessing the pharmaceutical benefit scheme as well. My two sons, for example, if they have scripts, that's part of the benefit as a pensioner. So, it's a great one to look into. It's a very clear definition. You essentially have to be legally blind to access the disability support pension, but it is one to have a conversation with your ophthalmologist to understand, well, where do you sit relevant to that threshold? And even if it's not now, at least you'll know when you will become eligible.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice, just to understand what that threshold looks like. And then when you actually get to that threshold, then it's time to, go and seek the support. Fantastic. All right. Well, you touched on it. Beautiful segue. Why don't we talk about the last area of support that you can access? And we might go back to that circle. Here we go. Additional government services. Perfect. So why don't you talk to us about this?
Yeah. So again, these were things I had no real knowledge of, but through this conversation with that eye surgeon, I investigated. interestingly, there was no kind of one-stop shop to learn about the different processes that are involved. So what Richard mentioned before in terms of having a resource like a web page that you can go to with all the various links and everything sort of self-contained, I think is going to be hugely helpful for people. Whereas I did actually have to go around and find the individual agency website, speak to different people, and it really was quite a big project to try and learn about each of these aspects. So just going down the list there, the NDIS is obviously very high profile and being talked about all the time, but it has definitions of vision loss in it, whereby if you're over a certain threshold, you are eligible to be a participant in the NDIS. So again, it's downloading the forms and the definitions and having the conversation with your ophthalmologist about where you sit. I know you hear a lot of negative press about the NDIS, but I actually so far have had a very positive experience with it. The thing I guess that I've learned about the NDIS is what it's designed to do is to allow you to live independently and to achieve the goals that you want to achieve in your life. So whatever they may be. So, the example that I've given to Richard is, with such young children and they're entering into, like my eldest has just started kindergarten this year and my youngest is in daycare. One of my goals, and this might sound really practical, but one of my really high priority goals is to be very present in their lives in terms of school drop-offs and pickups. And I guess what the NDIS would do in relation to that goal is they would have a conversation with me about, yes, your wife is able to drive, so she could drive you there. But if your wife happens to be working, for example, how would you achieve that goal, Shannon? So the way that the NDIS look at that process is they will say, well, on your worst day, when Bronwyn isn't available to help you, be there at the school pickup, how will you undertake that? How will you get to the school? And how will you safely get your son home? And so they'll work through that process and provide you with the necessary support or resources to be able to procure the necessary support for you to achieve that goal. And so I have a range of different things like that are actually really important to me that I've worked through with the NDIS, and I found them to be extremely helpful. And again, I think there's a process you have to go through to really make sure that your NDIS coordinator understands the impact of glaucoma as opposed to just standard vision loss. But that I found that quite easy to work through. And once you're in that relationship where your NDIS coordinator, which is kind of locally assigned to you depending on where you live, once that person understands the different impacts on your life based on the information they get from your ophthalmologist, for example, and from other specialists, it's very easy for them to start working on a plan with you that then rolls from year to year. And it is really just around whatever goals you may have. And that can be anything from, educational goals or travel goals or, whatever it may be that you're trying to achieve to live a fulfilled life despite your disability.
That sounds so wonderful and so just practical, really. It must have been a wonderful relief to have people have conversations with you like that, that was so focused on what your own goals are.
Yeah, they will constantly use the words, imagine it's your worst day. This is the thing I've noticed about the NDIS is it's always, no, because I'll often say, well, Bronwyn can take me. But the way it's meant to work is, assume that that person is not around and not available to help with that particular goal and task. Let's make sure that you have access to what you need to achieve that, because then you're independent and you're achieving that independently, and that's what they're all about. And so I've found them to be really, really good, and I believe that I'm growing in that relationship. But as I'm learning what's important to me in this new phase of my life, and I'm starting to grow into that relationship such that I'm sure that my dealings with the NDIS will continue to kind of expand over the years as my needs evolve, my goals evolve. As my children get older, for example, things will change. So the other one, you happy to move on to the next one, Richard? I'm happy to take any other questions on the NDIS.
I was just going to make a couple of quick points, and that is just to remind everyone that the NDIS, you need to be under the age of 65 to qualify for that. And the other thing I think that's wonderful about the architecture of the NDIS is Shannon's the one that's in control of choosing who he would like to provide him services within the umbrella of what you qualify for.
That's a really great reminder, actually, Richard. Yeah, there's a few different choices you can make. Once you're approved to be a participant, you can self-manage, which is the option that I've chosen, or you can have someone else manage your plan for you, which I think both are valid depending on circumstances. But in my case, I've really enjoyed having control of selecting the providers. And the other thing I've learned is, you don't have to go with the NDIS specialist provider. So there are companies out there that just provide services to NDIS participants, and they're possibly the people that can help you. But in the example that I referred to, someone that can get me to and from the school safely with my son, that there's any number of providers out there, and it might be a company that doesn't typically provide a service to an NDIS participant, but they may be the best and maybe the most economical choice for that. So, having that control of being able to go out in the market and select those providers, regardless of whether they're NDIS specialists, has been really good. But I can see a case where, depending on people's situations, having someone else manage it for them could be helpful as well.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. All right, well, let's go on to the next one. Talk to us about the Australian Disability Parking Scheme.
Yeah, so this is otherwise known, certainly in New South Wales, it's known as the Mobility Parking Scheme, but around Australia, it's a national scheme. And this is one, so as a non-driver, you pretty much automatically, so if you've medically surrendered your license, you're not able to drive for medical reasons, you will automatically qualify for the Disability Parking Scheme. Now, you might say, well, but you're not driving, so why do you need to be a part of the parking scheme? Well, it's any vehicle and any other driver that happens to be transporting you to and from any location. So in my case, Bronwyn, my wife, is the sole driver in the family. If I'm in the vehicle on any of the legs involved in that trip, then Bronwyn is able to park that vehicle in the designated disabled parking spots, which you'll see around at various shopping centres and so forth. And all major venues have disability parking. So it's interesting. Bronwyn and I have often spoken about this, but we actually believe it's been one of the best benefits that we've been able to access since everything's happened. And the reason for that is not so much that, I'm stumbling out of the car, but it is actually really, really helpful, particularly in the evenings or when the sun's going down and you've got that risk of tripping that lots of people with glaucoma have because of the ability to deal with glare has diminished so much. To be closer to wherever it is that you're going to is a significant help to your overall safety. And so I've really enjoyed the convenience of Bronwyn being able to access that mobility parking when we're going to and from whatever it might be. And I believe as a result, I'm actually a lot safer from trips and falls, and it's hugely convenient. So, it's actually a really interesting one to throw into the mix with that conversation around trying to retain your license. I know there's a lot of people out there right on that threshold that fight to retain their license, but one of the good pieces of news that if you decide to give up on that fight and surrender your license, you will become eligible for this disability parking scheme automatically.
Fantastic. All right, brilliant. And let's go on to the next one. What about number 3?
Yes, so the public transport, again, it's fairly, so this is free public transport on all modes of public transport, whether it be buses, trains, ferries, and so forth. And it's a New South Wales government benefit. And again, you are automatically entitled to be a part of that program if you are unable to drive for medical reasons. That's hugely useful, particularly in the inner city areas where there's a lot of public transport on offer. So again, that's a great way of sort of feeling okay about the fact that you're no longer able to drive because you are able to get around point to point pretty well. And then in relation to trips that aren't covered or are as easy to do with public transport, there is the taxi subsidy scheme, which is state-based. So in New South Wales, the way that works is you get a rebate on a taxi trip up to the value of $60. So it's 50% off the fare up to the value of $60. And so it used to be a voucher system, and now there's a card that you get given, and you tap that and then you pay the remainder of the balance. But again, that's an excellent benefit for any of those trips that aren't sort of easy to do using public transport. I tend to use that for those types of trips. And for example, in Melbourne, I'm aware that program has expanded to not just be taxis, it's taxis and Ubers. And I would expect in most major cities that development will continue to roll out. So I would imagine in the future I'll be able to use that benefit in a taxi or an Uber.
Fantastic. Well, this has all just been such valuable information. I would like to finish up with something that's a little bit more Glaucoma Australia focused. So for many people out there, you might not realise, but Glaucoma Australia actually does provide a support service for patients, for people who are at any point in their glaucoma journey. I know that Shannon speaks very, very highly of our lead clinical educator, Sapna, who's helped him a lot during his journey. If anyone's interested in accessing that service, I should say it's free of charge. And go on our website, which is www.glaucoma.org.au, or you can call our 1-800 number, which is 1-800-500-880. So maybe just to sort of finish off, Shannon, you might want to just talk a little bit about your experiences with having, and I describe it to people as almost like a concierge service, for your glaucoma and your treatment journey. So maybe you can talk about your experiences with Glaucoma Australia.
Yeah. No, as I said at the start, I was referred, so I didn't actually initially, reach out myself. Someone reached out to me, which was really beautiful, actually, because it was a scary time. And so I received a number of phone calls initially from different people that they were volunteers, I believe, that were reaching out to me to talk to me about my diagnosis. And they really showed a lot of care. And there were times where, I'd be sort of scared of having the conversation, so I kind of put it off, but they'd call back, and they were wanting to have those conversations with me about, well, what has your ophthalmologist said about your diagnosis? What treatments are you on? Do you need any advice in relation to how to take those eye drops? There's a number of tips and things we can help you with. And slowly but surely, I started to really appreciate those calls, to the point where I would actually be looking forward to them. And I invited, more regular conversations. And then at a certain point in time, Sapna and I did connect, because the nature of the conversations became quite technical. And Sapna, being an amazing orthoptist herself, has a lot of knowledge and experience with some of the big issues that I was dealing with, particularly around the laser surgery and the trabeculectomy surgery. She was just wonderful to talk to through that process, and really helped me to navigate the different decision-making processes I was dealing with. And so, I feel like I've connected with the Glaucoma Australia team really, really well. And the thing that I would remind everyone of is, and I've said this to Richard on many occasions, you've got to remember that the core team is it 6, Richard? 6 people in the core team at Glaucoma Australia?
Let's say it's 8.
8. Let's say it's 8. I would say, based on my professional services experience, the sort of content and assistance that's being put out into the community for people like myself from Glaucoma Australia is so powerful. You would think there's 8,000 people behind it. It's literally that great for someone in my circumstances. And yet it's incredible that 8 people can actually generate that and keep that going. But it's a good reminder to all of us that, this is a team and this is an organization that relies on donors and support from the community to help people that are in a situation like this. And so, I really have valued and enjoyed getting to know the whole of Glaucoma Australia, the whole entire organization. And I really continue to appreciate those conversations and those calls as a glaucoma sufferer. I mean, I'm going for my checkup on Monday, and if that doesn't go so well from a diagnosis or a checkup perspective, one of the people that I would be looking forward to speaking to about that would be Sapna. That'd be one of the first people that I'd be reaching out to just bounce things around and get another perspective, or clarify something I didn't quite understand. So I must say it is a remarkably wonderful service for people that are in this situation, because it is a very scary disease to be dealing with. It's a progressive disease. It's a loss of vision. There's nothing scarier, really. So it is wonderful to have that support.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say all of those things. I notice now we've been going for 50 minutes. I hope everyone's still stuck with us. I thought you'd all find this information just so fascinating. I knew it just set my mind on fire when I first had my first conversation with Shannon. So I really hope it's provided value to you all. I should have mentioned at the top of the session, it is World Glaucoma Week, and we have had a very, very busy set of events and promotions going. If you're interested in supporting Glaucoma Australia, we're actually running the 7 Sites Challenge at the moment, which is a fantastic way that you can support the work that we do, so that we can provide these sorts of services to Shannon ongoing, but also many, many other thousands of patients that might want to access this sort of support in the future. Go to 7 Sites, which is spelled SEVEN, sites.org.au, and make a donation. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank Shannon again. Thank you, Shannon. You're an absolute inspiration. You're an inspirational fundraiser, as well as being an inspirational patient. I know that everyone will have gotten enormous amounts of value hearing your story tonight. So thank you so much for making yourself available. I just want to thank you, Glaucus. Thank you. I want to thank Glaucus once more for sponsoring these sessions, and to wish you all the best. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one sometime soon.